130. I know my name is written there. My name's in the book of life. Good song. Brother Leonard's going to lead us in that song. And then after that, Brother Larry, would you word our prayer for us, please? Well, if you'll get your Bibles out now and turn them to the book of 1 Corinthians, we're going to begin with chapter 13 and verse 2. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 2. And while you're turning there, actually I'll read verse 1, but while you're turning there, what I'd like to do is to remind you of really what's going on in this letter. You know, when you have a letter that has 16 chapters in it, and it's as long as the letter that Paul writes, it would be very easy for us as we focus in on some of the details to miss the bigger picture of what it's all really about. And I think Paul sets the stage in chapter 1 as he talks about the division that exists there in the church and how that division has manifested itself in so many different ways. I think about how it's manifested itself in the lack of discipline, the fact that they didn't discipline a person because evidently some were in favor of a person even though they were living in very public sin. I think about the difficulty of lawsuits between brethren. And I think about what he talks about when he gets to chapter 11, the Lord's Supper and how it was being abused. And so it's not surprising when you get to chapters 12 through 14 that the miraculous gifts, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, are also being misused People are taking them and using them for pride rather than for the edification of the church. Paul has emphasized, as I tried to do in the sermon this morning, that while we are many members, we're still one body. But when you start talking about many members, each member has a responsibility with regards to this. And so, who is the only person that I can actually control? Me, myself. And so when we're reading this, it is essential that each of us think about it in terms of application for ourselves personally. And I'm very much reminded about what Paul said in chapter 12 when he talked about if a person was not, maybe they were the eye and I'm not the ear, or I'm the hand and I'm not the foot. We sometimes have this idea that it's everybody else's responsibility to fix the problem, but I can't change what everybody else does. I can try to persuade them to change, but there's only one person that I can really change, and that's me. And as I get to the end of chapter 12, I want you to look at verse 31 of chapter 12. But earnestly desire the best gifts, yet I show you a more excellent way. I'm going to show you something that is more valuable than even these miraculous gifts. Does that mean that the miraculous gifts were not valuable? They weren't important? No. What he's saying is this means this is something far more valuable and far more important. Well, what do you mean by that, Paul? Though I speak with the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am become a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and though understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have faith so as I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. Now, when you think about those first two verses, speaking with the tongues of men and angels, we discussed that last week. The tongues of men, plural, though I could speak with the tongues of men and angels. Evidently, Paul is intending to encompass here all the languages. I want you to imagine, I'm impressed whenever we go to Israel and we speak to our tour guides, and I'll say, how many languages do you speak? They say fluently or understand. And I'm like, either one of them. And most of them, it's like 8 or 9 languages. Can y'all imagine that, being able to speak 8 or 9 languages fluently? That if you have a tour group comes in this week and they're Germans, you can speak German fluently. Next tour group next week is Americans from the South, and you can speak Southern. Y'all think I'm joking, don't you? It's a language all of its own. And they know and in fact, when we walk by, as we're walking through the old city of Jerusalem, there'll be people who will say in the Alabama store, come on in, y'all. And there's actually, as you get near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there is an Alabama store right there, Crimson Tide. And it's just, it always amazes me that there would be a store like that there in the old city of Jerusalem. Shows you how far it goes. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make, a person could speak all the languages, not only of men, but of angels, whatever language angels speak. But he says, but have not love, I am become a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. Though I were... Because he's going to go into verse 2 of chapter 13 here. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and notice how he goes on to say, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge. Y'all notice the significance of that word, all. And though I have all faith, so as I could remove mountains. That's the reason why I'm suggesting that in verse 1, if you're going to have the parallel here, it would be all the languages of men and angels. But he says, if I could have the gift of prophecy, understand all mysteries, all knowledge, though I have faith, remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. What is that telling you? Let me use a modern day parallel. Let's say you have a man coming in to preach who has the most eloquent gift of language. I mean, words just fall off of his tongue. He knows exactly how to express everything, how to put it in language that you identify with. He also has knowledge that he never has to look at a scripture. He knows it. He's got it all in his head. And here's a man who's able to put it in such a way that you can understand everything that's being said. That person is not living a godly life. Does all that eloquence and all that knowledge do him any good? No, it doesn't. What Paul is describing here is, if you do not have love, now let me back up here and let's plug it back into the context. How does this fit in the context of what Paul is trying to say as he's talking about people who are desiring better gifts? People who want the ability to speak in tongues. People who want the ability to have the gift of prophecy. And he says, but I'm going to tell you there's something that you should be desiring more than that. That's love. And in this context, that's what's going to solve the problem of the disunity, because they don't have the right attitude toward one another. Now, he is not suggesting that the tongues, the prophecy, the knowledge of the mysteries, all of these things are not essential. What he's saying is, if you don't have love, they'd have no meaning. Because people do not care what you know until they know that you care. And so in Paul trying to make this point, this is something that's going to be required for them to solve their unity problem. Verse 3, and though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. Now, when you read verse 3, what's Paul talking about? Bestowing all my goods to feed the poor. Okay. When you think about people who give, do you remember the rich young ruler? What did the Lord tell him to do? Sell what you have and give it to the poor. Could he have done that and not had the right attitude toward it? Absolutely. Because if you read Matthew chapter 6, Jesus talked about, your giving of alms. He said, if you're doing it to be seen of men, you've got what you were looking for. You got your reward. And Paul said here, he says, if I bestow all my goods to feed the poor. But he doesn't stop there. He says, though I give my body to be burned. What do you mean giving your body to be burned? Is he talking about when you get old and you pass away being cremated? You're giving your physical body. In other words, everything it takes out of you, you've given that. He said, but I have not love, it profits me nothing. Can I do great things with a wrong attitude toward them? Yes. And what Paul is driving home to each of them in each of these illustrations is, you may think that God has given you this gift, but if you're not using it properly, and you're not concerned about the best interest of those people, he says, it's not going to profit you anything. They may draw some benefit from it. If I give all my goods to feed the poor, the poor are going to have food to eat. Yes. What's it going to do for me eternally? Do you remember Jesus sitting opposite of the treasury? And the people are coming in and they're putting their money in. And the actual word that's used there is the horn of the treasury, which lets you know how it was made. I wish I had a picture just all of a sudden I could put it up. But if you imagine like a big tuba horn comes up, has the thing, and you can imagine the brass of it. If you were to take change and you were to pour that change in it, what kind of noise would it make? A sound of brass and clank. Well, you can imagine somebody who's got a big sack of coins. And to have a lot of money, you'd have a big sack of coins, would you not? And you're standing there and you're pouring that sack and a ting, 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 ting. Boy, it just, it's sounding like one of those pinball machines. And yeah, those counters there. But he also used another illustration of a lady who come in, and what did she have? 2 mites. They're about the size of the end of your little finger. Maybe thick as a penny, but about the diameter of the end of like a pencil eraser. You throw those 2 in there, what noise are they going to make? But Jesus is sitting there, and the Bible says, he was watching as people were putting their money in. And he says, this woman has given more than them all. Why? She gave all that she had. And why did she give? She evidently loved people, or she wouldn't have given it. Because hers didn't bring any attention to herself. She had the right attitude of it. So Paul is saying, I want to show you a better way. I want to show you something more valuable than all of that. Well, that'll affect people long after everything else is gone. Let's look at verses 4 and following here, because verses 4 through the first part of verse 8 is a description of what love in a biblical sense does, the agape type love. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. Now let's go back and let's look at verses 4 through the first part of verse 8. Love suffers long. What does that mean? Don't quit. We usually reverse the words. We say long suffering. And that's the word which indicates patience, not giving up. When these verses are often read, where do you generally hear them read? Weddings. And that is true. And this really has application. But the first application is within the church and within the body of Christians. And as we read this morning in reading Ephesians chapter 4, do you remember what he said? With all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering. And that word is used a lot to describe the way we relate to one another. Now, I want you to look at these key words here. The word suffer. Do we sometimes have to go through difficulties for somebody else? To literally suffer for them? What if your husband or your wife or your child is sick and you have to stay up all night? Is that long suffering? Yes. You're suffering something because of them. Why do you do that, though? Because love motivates you to do that. You care about their best interest. You put that as the most important thing. Love suffers long. But he goes along with that and he says, is kind. Now tell me what that is. Gentle. I'm really glad you put it the way I wanted it said. Sometimes when you are long suffering with somebody else, you want them to know that, hey, I had to stay up all night with you. You ought to appreciate me. And you make them feel bad for being sick. You make them feel bad for whatever you were trying to do to help them. That's not the way real love acts toward people. Real love treats those people with kindness, because if there's any time in their life they deserve and need kindness, it's when they're sick, where they're going through some difficulty. And Paul is here trying to say real love is kind, because it treats people the way you yourself want to be treated. Let's say, for instance, you're sick and somebody comes and says, well, do you want me to make some soup for you? Well, I don't really like your soup. Is that the way you want people to treat you? Matthew 7:12, as therefore you would that men would do to you, do you also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. You treat people like you want to be treated. And that requires some thought on our part. And it becomes difficult. I can tell you, through the years, being a preacher, you hear a lot of things. And there's some people who patiently, kindly, caringly provide help for their family, not just days and weeks, months and years, but for many years. And they treat one another the way it ought to be treated. Next, love does not envy. Now, let's talk about that word envy just a second. What does envy mean? Well, that's a pain that you've got, but that's part of jealousy. But there's even a little more negative aspect to envy. You regret the fact that they have it. You wish that they did not have it. You know, jealousy is saying, I want what they've got. Envy is saying, I want what they've got and I don't want them to have it. You know, if somebody goes out and buys a new car and you go out there and say, boy, that's a beautiful new car. I wish I had one. That's jealousy. If you go out there and you look and say, they got a new car, and I wish I had a new car, but I wish they didn't have one. That you see, there's a more negative connotation to what this is. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is the point. Because here you are, if they really understood this, they would understand how bad of an attitude this really is. Because let's say, for instance, in your home, I'm trying to think of something that is honorable and right. let's say, for instance, your spouse gets a good inheritance. It's community property. But if they get a good inheritance, does it benefit them? Well, sure it does. But to say, I wish they hadn't gotten that inheritance, I wish I had gotten that inheritance. Do y'all realize this, the selfishness of it? But in reality, what that ends up doing is, if you wish something bad on someone else, you're actually hurting yourself. Because we're all in this together, we're all in one body. And if you say, I wish that person over there did not have the gift of prophecy, what are you doing to the congregation if you say, I wish they didn't have the gift of prophecy? You're wishing that part of it would go away and the benefit that was from that. And so love does not envy. It does not wish bad on someone else because of the good that has come their direction. Love does not parade itself. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, since we're on new cars, Leonard said, don't you wish you had one? It pairs with envy, because if a person says, look what I've got, don't you wish you had one? What are we actually doing to the other person? We're promoting or provoking envy on their part. Do you understand? Envy and parading itself are the two sides of this issue here. Because when you are parading yourself, you're trying to get someone else to be envious of you. And I can look back and think about chapter 12 when he says, one part cannot say, I have no need of you. Look what I've got. I don't need you. I'm parading what I have before you so that you will wish that you had what I have. And the sadness that that brings about in a church when people are either envious or provoking envy, either one of those, is not puffed up. And you might say, well, that just goes with parading. But there's another aspect of being puffed up. I am better than you. I'm looking down on you. I'm angry at you. This is, to use the original word, the English word that goes with it, hubris. The idea that I'm full of myself. Love does not behave rudely. What does it mean to be rude? Surely you know.
Somebody in the lobby, and somebody else comes up and thinks you're not even there and starts talking to that same person, not thinking, where'd that come from? Didn't you see me engaged in this conversation? And they just come right up, what I am, take it over.
Joe's giving an illustration. I'm repeating these because sometimes I go back and listen to the lessons, and there's always a silence in the recording. So I'm trying to repeat. Joe's point is that there's ways that we exhibit rudeness. One of them is to butt in when somebody else is talking. And if you knew my grandmother, she would get you if you did that. But there are a number of ways that we're rude to people. How are some other ways that we're rude to people? Okay, you can look at somebody and be rude. Ignore them. That's what Joe was saying, is you ignore the person's presence. Not open the door might be not being kind. Slamming the door would be rude. Okay, not even acknowledge somebody. You walk by them and treat them as if they didn't exist. Okay, how do you do that? Okay, let me tell you a thing that bothers me. Here I am, and here's a lady or maybe a person who's on a cane walking in the door, and I hold the door open for them. And then a big, burly, strong guy walks in behind. Bro, I didn't hold the door open for you. I held it open for them. You know, you could have grabbed the door yourself. You know, that's being rude. That you yourself could have done that. You could have held the door open for them. It's one thing to be courteous. It's another to be kind, and then it's another to be rude. There's a lot of people who are rude in their speech to another person, in the fact that they put them down. Y'all agree with that? That's being rude, hurtful, inflicting harm on somebody else. The rudeness is to behave in a fashion that is less than respectful.
Tony, this is an area that I struggle with because I'm constantly trying to look for opportunities to stand for the areas that I feel I need to stand for. It could be religiously, it could be politically, whatever, and I'm constantly concerned that in standing for this position that I somehow acted discourteously or rudely to someone. So I struggle with it.
That's a really good point. I'm glad Steve brought that up. Okay. Well, let's take it out of the political realm. Let's keep it as far as we can in the religious realm. Now, I will agree, there's a lot of rudeness that takes place in social media. Can we be rude to people, spiritually speaking, with whom we disagree? And if we are rude to people with whom we disagree religiously, do we think that they believe we love them enough to care about their souls? If we behave rudely, do they think we really care about them? No. In other words, if somebody refers to their religion as stupid or as ignorant or as any other thing, how's that generally received? Disrespectful. And if I am treating somebody with no respect, I'm behaving rudely. Love does not behave rudely. I'm going to confess something here. Years ago, the elders had asked me to teach the teenage class. And the teenage class had asked me to do the class on the denominations. And I did. I was actually teaching in room 6 and 7 over here. And we got to the what we refer to as hard shell Baptist, primitive Baptist, that practice foot washing. And I had made the comment in class that I guess there are people with dirty feet. Just passing comment. After class was over, one of the young men in the class was dating a young lady who was coming with him to church every time, and her family were Primitive Baptist. And he said, you embarrassed her in class. I didn't know that. I apologized to her. And, but sometimes we can say something like that, not knowing, even not intentionally trying to be rude. But if you are not careful, is it possible that you can be rude to people and make them think that you don't care about them? Absolutely.
I didn't do it unintentionally. One of my friends, when we were teenagers, was Catholic, and I made fun of him for not eating hamburgers on Friday because Catholics would eat fish. And of course, he didn't get all upset. He said, "Well, I didn't make the rules," you know. But I just felt an urge to say that rather than kid him about not eating hamburgers on Friday.
Perhaps for us, most of us would be better off if we resisted the urge. You know what James chapter 1 says? Let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man works not the righteousness of God. So for us sometimes, I will tell you that as I read social media sometimes, immediately through my mind goes, I need to write something in response to that. Wisdom has taught me, wait a while, and if you wait a while, you know what happens? You realize it's not worth the attempt to try to correct everybody's mistakes. Yeah. You know, the thing about it is, a lot of us wear our feelings on our sleeves and we allow things. And well, let's go ahead. Willie's brought up a good point. I'm actually going too slow here. So, yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, some of us are a little more thick-skinned. We've learned it over the years. I used to tell people I have a turtle shell. You can say pretty much anything to me, and I can take it. I've done that for years. Well, that's some of my loving brethren. But yeah, that's where we're going to get is not provoked. Let's go ahead and take does not seek its own and is not provoked so I don't run out of time here. Does not seek its own. Selfishness is at the heart of what he's talking about. You know, this person here who behaves rudely, who does these things, is really more interested in themselves and trying to, sometimes we have this idea that in order to make myself look better, what do I have to do? I have to put somebody else down, make them look lower. And that rarely works. Because whenever I see somebody, let's say here's a man and his wife, and the man mocks and makes fun of his wife publicly. Does that make you think he's a lot more of a man? No, it makes you think he's not much of a man because he's doing all that. Is not provoked. Is, as Willie brought out, it's a glory for a man to overlook a transgression. There's a lot of things about which you and I ought to learn not to become upset. And when someone behaves toward us what we may think is in a rude way, I realize that not everybody gets up on the right side of the bed every day. And some people are going through difficulties in their life that I'm not aware of. And they may say things that when you're like, why did he say that? Why did he react that way? Well, you don't know everything that's going on. You don't know that the dog bit him and the kids were crying and him and his wife were having an argument before they left to come to church in the morning.
These school children come in the morning, you think, what happened to you if your dog died or something like that? And then you realize you don't know what kind of night they spent. You don't know how that family is torn apart. And I always use the example, I might have spent the night under the Frank D. Clement Bridge or something. You don't know.
For us, many times, we ought to have the same kind of love that says, I'm not going to become upset. And I will tell you that in families, as well as in the church, people will sometimes say things that they ought not say. But how do you respond to it? The Bible tells us not to return evil for evil, but rather good for evil. And so as people try to do things that provoke us, sometimes we ought to say, I'm not going to be provoked. Do you think that people sometimes come and dig at us out of jealousy? Yes. And so what's the best thing to do? To let them know that they got under your skin? No. Because if they find out they get under your skin, guess what they're going to do? They're going to dig it just a little bit deeper. Like, aha, I got him now. He's, I got him where he's going to understand how I feel. No, that's not the way. Thinks no evil. That's very, what's that? I wouldn't say it's impossible, but... Well, temptation will come before us, but you don't have to let it live with you. And building a nest. And building a nest. Let's... Yeah. Let me back it up now. He's talking about our treatment of one another. And what he's thinking about is, do you have evil surmising about that other person's thoughts and actions and motives? Do you think that everybody is out to get you? Do you believe the worst about everybody? And see, that's what he's talking about. Love thinks no evil about that other person. You're not thinking everything bad about that person with whom you're dealing. Now, let me go ahead because I've got to get 6 and 7 in. I've got 1 minute left to go, so y'all got to get. Does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in truth. You don't take delight in another person's failures. You do take delight in that person's successes. And you do that towards your children. You don't take delight when your kids get in trouble at school, do you? But you do take delight in the fact when they do well. If you do that for your ones that you love, and you love the brotherhood, then you're going to take delight when the church does well. Then verse 7, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Notice that again, all. He bears, he believes, he hopes, he endures all things. And then before Kurt rings a bell, love never fails. And what we're going to do is, Lord willing, next week we're going to pick up with what things do fail in the latter part of verse 8.